And we are live. G'day everyone, Mike Jeffrey here, and you are listening to My Creative Journey, episode number 37. To all you new listeners out there, hello, and thank you so much for taking the time to stop by here today. As I said, my name is Mike, and I'm a photographer, podcaster, and small business owner based here in Sydney, Australia. Each week on the show, I bring you guys along on the highs and lows of my own creative journey and share all the knowledge that I've gained along the road to building my own freelance business. In this week's episode, I'm going to talk about something which does hold a lot of people back, and I've sort of touched on it before, and that is the idea of imposter syndrome. The idea where you can feel like you're not up to actually talking about a particular topic. You're not actually at a status where you think you can perform in any certain task. And I think this is something that holds a lot of creative people back, and it's definitely something that I've struggled with before. So we're going to be touching on a little bit about that today. But before I jump into that, I want to talk about what has been going on for me this past week and a few things that I forgot to mention in last week's episode. So last week's episode, I recorded last Friday, but I didn't touch on one of the things that happened during last week in that episode. And that was that I passed 1,000 followers on my main Instagram account. And that was something that I'd been looking forward to, I guess, for quite some time. Been planning for it for a little bit of time, but even earlier than that, I'd been sort of stuck at around that sort of 600, 700 follower mark for quite some time. And now I don't want to spend too much time talking about how many followers you have on Instagram or any particular app, because I don't think that actually means anything. But for the sort of reference of that, I was sort of feeling like my work wasn't actually being pushed out of really like reaching anyone new. And it can start to feel hard when you are trying to create work and constantly creating stuff and not feeling like your work is being distributed to anyone and trying to feel like no one new is coming along to see your work, when that is the aim of all artists, trying to be able to push work out there and get as many people to see your art as possible. So when you're feeling like you're starting to stagnate around that certain mark, it can be very hard to produce new work. But it was something that I was trying to do and actively trying to push more work out there and get more people to see my work and hopefully enjoy it as well. And by that number increasing, by the amount of followers I have increasing, shows me that people are enjoying my work. It's all good to say that I'm getting so many thousand views on my videos or on my photos or on my podcast or things like that. I'm getting views and getting people to come and actually listen to my stuff. If they're not subscribing, if they're not signing up to be a part of the community, then they probably don't enjoy it much, and it's probably not something that they really want to see all the time. So that conversion rate is something that I was heavily trying to focus on, and I was glad to get to a point where people were starting to convert and actually being more interested in the work that I was trying to put out there in the world. So last week I did a bit of a giveaway for reaching 1,000 followers on Instagram. I gave away one of my prints to a follower on my Instagram account, and I ran a bit of a giveaway for 48 hours there, and that was a exciting time because I hadn't run a giveaway in over a year. Actually, I ran a giveaway early last year, at the start of 2020, and I was a bit apprehensive about how this one would go, because last year when I ran the giveaway, I got about 4 people enter the giveaway, which really wasn't a lot and didn't give me a lot to choose from in that sense. So it was hard to sort of give something away when hardly anyone is entering. You feel like it's not really a giveaway when it's only your sort of close friends and family entering. It's like, well, this is not really helping. But it's great to be able to give away to those sort of people, because I know that anyone who does follow me has obviously supported me in some respect, and I'm glad that they're there, and I would love to be able to give them stuff, and that's really good to be able to show my appreciation, and I really do appreciate anyone who supports me and supports my work in any aspect, so that's really nice. But I was scared to put that out there because I didn't know if anyone would be interested, but in the end we had over 110, 120 people enter the contest to win that print, and I was very glad, because to see so many people interested and to see people actually wanting an actual piece of my work, but also that they were happy to enter to be able to share it around and be able to be engaged in the work that I was trying to do. So that was really nice. And I was really glad to give away that print last week. And it was something that I'll learn from, and I definitely will be doing more giveaways in the future. And I'm really happy to talk about it if anyone would be interested in hearing about how the process goes behind actually running a giveaway. And I'll probably talk about that in a future episode, because I think it can be a good thing to sort of build your brand a little bit as well, to sort of build new audience and get new people in and get your community to share your work more when you do give them that sort of incentive to be able to share your work. But it can also be good to gain more trust of the followers you've already got. And I think that's certainly important, because people tend to forget about the followers they've already got. They're too busy worried about trying to create new followers or trying to get out there to the world to actually get new followers, when they're not overly focused on the followers that they've already got. When you've already got them, it's so much easier to hold on to them than to have to go and find a new follower. So if you're not focusing on trying to keep the ones you've got, then you could easily lose them and see that your numbers start to decline, and you're going to be doing more work than you need to be. So it sometimes can be smart to really focus on those guys. And I don't think it's just smart. I think it's the best thing to do. If someone's there trying to be a part of your community, you've got to help them as much as you possibly can. And that's all that I've ever tried to do. And I think that is one of the best ways to be able to grow, I think, on any social media app, is to be able to keep the people you've got and really hold them really tight, because once someone's actually in your community, you're in a prime position to hold them and hold them long term, and hopefully you can have that sort of interaction where you are able to give to them and they're able to give to you, and it sort of feels like that two-way street. Then something else that I wanted to touch on that sort of similar strain of thing is Instagram stories. Now, this is not something that I really talk about very often, and I think it's one of the most undervalued assets on Instagram at the moment, especially when people are trying to put more emphasis on reels and things like that, is Instagram stories. And that is one of the things where not too many people actually show up on their Instagram stories. And I think they're really like missing a mark there. As I just said, you got to focus on the followers you've already got. Now, one of the big downsides with Instagram stories is you're not going to reach any new people with Instagram stories. That's just one of the big downsides. You're allowed to put hashtags in your Instagram stories, but to be honest, it's really not going to do a lot for you. It's not going to create new followers. No one really goes and checks the stories of a particular hashtag anymore. It's not really something that anyone seems to do. So you're not going to really be sort of reaching anyone new like you could be on Instagram Reels. For example, you could be trying to put the same type of content on your story or on a reel, and you could see a lot more people view the Instagram Reel. But the people you're trying to connect with on your stories are people who are already in your community. So you can speak to them hopefully on a deeper and more sort of different level than you could be speaking on Instagram Reels. You don't know who you're going to be sort of targeting on your Reels, but on your stories, you can really target a group of people who you know are interested in your type of work. I wouldn't be trying to put intricate sort of details of work that I do out there on my Reels, because I don't know who is on the other end of those Reels, and I don't know who's listening to those, and I don't know if that type of audience is someone that wants to be involved in anything that I do, and that could easily turn them away. It's probably not going to help. There's no point spending a lot of time on that because it's not going to really do anything. Whereas when someone sees that on my stories, they first off know that I've only sent that to them because they are someone who follows me. So they're only seeing that because they do already follow me. So that feels like sort of some sort of part of a community there, because no one else is going to see that outside of people who do follow me. So that gives them that reason to not unfollow me if they're enjoying the work on my stories, for one. But for two, I think it's a good way to be able to build that connection, especially when the type of content you can be providing on your stories, you can provide a lot more of a service. People do scroll through their stories a lot more than they would be scrolling up and down through their feed these days. So you can provide a lot on your stories because people actually view them. And I do get a lot of views on my stories every day from people coming back, and I see the same people coming back and viewing my stories because they tend to turn up in that sort of top half of their stories and of people who they actively interact with. And if I'm in that group, then they're going to continue to see my stuff. Whereas if I do post a photo, they may not necessarily see that because they may not be scrolling up and down the feed. They may not be having a look at all my reels and things like that. So I have a prime opportunity there to target someone because I know that is where people spend a majority of time on the Instagram app these days, even though that area isn't able to be targeted by anyone outside of the list of people I'm already following, apart from ads and things like that. So you've already got that sort of connection. When people are flicking through there, they don't think that the work is going to be someone trying to be an ad or anything like that. So they're thinking that it's already people that they know and trust. So they're actually more engaged with the work that is going to be there. And so, yeah, I've been trying this out and I've been trying to be more active on my stories recently. And I think it's been really helping. I think I get a lot of responses on my stories. I get more probably responses on my stories than I do responses on my reels. And if I just post a photo, my feed these days, I don't get many sort of comments on those photos, but I'll get a lot of responses on my stories. And I see a lot of people reply to stories a lot more, or if I add like a slider on the story, or if I add some sort of poll or something like that, I get a lot of responses on those sort of things because it's easy and people can go through and sort of respond and add little things and actually keep up to date with the things that it is that I do in my daily life or in my business and things like that. So I think people sort of use that more so than scrolling up and down their feed. So I've been trying to put more of myself on there and trying to get on there on like videos and speaking more on there because I think it is a genuine way where you can connect with people. And I look with the people that I really respect on the app and people who I look up to and who I do follow And the reason I tune into them is because they also provide me a more inside look into their life than I would be getting if I wasn't following them. If I wasn't able to access their stories, for example, I wouldn't be getting that inside look at what it is they do every single day. And when they're turning up and giving me information that I may not have known before, I really appreciate that. So I've been trying to put as much as myself out there, and I wanted to encourage anyone else to try and get out there on their stories, because I think it's a great way to connect with the people who are your friends and people who you already have in that sort of group, and people who have signed up to be there to be a part of your community. And I think that's one of the best ways, if you can be actively trying to put work there and not just post reels all the time, and really turning up on your stories to show the people that it's not all about trying to connect with other people. Yeah, of course, that is the aim in business, is to connect with a wide variety of people and to try and get your work out there in the world. But also, once I bring you in, you also get a bit more of me. Here it is on my stories. And I've really appreciated that. And I've really seen a lot of growth and a lot of messages and a lot of people sticking around and becoming that sort of closer community through that. And I would encourage anyone else to jump on their stories and be more open and more themselves on there. And so the last thing I want to talk about before we jump into today's topic is my sort of energy on this podcast. I was going back through and editing last week's episode, and I realized that I really don't have a lot of energy on this podcast whatsoever. I feel like I'm always sitting here and I'm not smiling at all. It's one of the big downsides, I guess, of having a video podcast, is that I get to watch it myself back every single week and get to see how I'm expressing myself and how I'm reacting to all things that I'm talking about. And sometimes I tend to sit here of an afternoon and just think that that there's no real energy at all, and I don't know why I'm not being more emphasized on the points that I'm trying to make, because all this stuff is something that really does excite me, and I'm really glad that I'm able to have this platform to talk about things. So I'm really trying to put more of an emphasis into that, and maybe it is because I normally record of an afternoon and I'm out of energy by the end of the day. So at the moment I'm recording this in the morning, so hopefully I've got a bit more energy this morning to be able to record this episode than other episodes that I have done before, but we will soon see, I guess. And if you guys could let me know, that would be great, because I suppose only having the audio version, it doesn't really come across that much, but I suppose when you see the video more so, if anyone is watching on YouTube, hello, and thank you for tuning in. Please let me know if there is anything you think that I'm not being overly interactive with you guys, and I'm not really sort of bringing that energy that I really want to be bringing here every single week, because it is one of those things that I've been really trying to emphasize, because I think, why would you want to sit down and listen to someone for half an hour when they're really just rambling on and they really don't have much energy about the things that it is they are talking about? Because if they're not getting energized and really passionate about the things they're talking about, then why would I be interested in being here as well? So I've been trying to emphasize on that a little bit more, and hopefully we can bring a little bit more energy. And in that vein, I sort of put out a question on my Instagram stories this last week about the actual length of the episodes, because this is something that I've gone back and forth on quite a lot, and of how long I really want these episodes to be. And most of you guys on the stories tended to say that you would prefer sort of shorter episodes between that 20 to 30 minute mark. And I was a little bit surprised by that, because I enjoy sort of longer episodes, but I know that they're a lot harder for me to produce. So I'm glad in a way that you guys are preferring the shorter episodes, and I'm glad that it's able to provide that little bit of a bite-sized informational piece, I guess, that you can just listen to for under half hour and move on with your day. Whereas me, I like to really listen to really longer episodes, because I'm working here through the day or I'm exercising for longer periods of time. But I suppose it's all coming down to where everyone's actually listening to these episodes at the moment, and how long that they do like. And I can totally understand that the attention span isn't always there. As I listen to episodes just in the background and not really paying super attention, but if you were to be paying attention, you wouldn't want these episodes to be dragging on for long periods of time. So I'm glad, and hopefully if I can condense these episodes and I can bring more energy, hopefully that is able to all combine well to produce a good episode, and hopefully it'll be a great one again today. So without further ado, let's jump into today's episode, which is all about imposter syndrome. And this is something that I've been wanting to speak about for quite some time, but I just haven't got around to making the episode. And really it really comes down to being one of the biggest things that I think holds a lot of people back. And so I'm really excited that I get to make this episode, but excited to be able to talk about it, because I think it helps me, but it also help you guys as well. And I'm really glad that we're in this position where I'm able to sort of provide that sort of value. And hopefully through this episode, you'll be able to gain a little bit, but hopefully be able to gain a little bit more understanding around what it is that imposter syndrome is. And hopefully hearing it from my perspective may be able to provide you guys something to understand what it is in your own life and how you can sort of go about overcoming that a little bit and moving on from it. So for me, it really manifests itself in thinking that why am I in a position to be able to talk about all these different types of things? And I think on the podcast is one of those prime examples of a place where imposter syndrome can really strike. For me, it's something that I have to always think about and always overcome the fact that I may not be the most educated person in this area, So what gives me the right to be able to speak about any of the things that I do talk about on this podcast, or who would be out there trying to listen to me talk about something that I'm not overly educated in? So for me, overcoming that has always been something that's been really tough, and trying to switch in my own mindset to think that it's okay to talk about these things. It's great to have multiple different opinions out there and all that other stuff. And I don't need to be the most educated person on something to speak about something, It's also sort of manifested itself in my life through photography as well, because in those early stages, it was a real thing of, it became hard to advertise myself as a photographer. It became hard to sort of put myself out there and put the word out that I was a photographer, because I had that imposter syndrome of, I'm not actually a photographer. I'm just pretending that I am, and someday I'll be found out, and someday everyone will realize that I'm not really a photographer, or I'm not actually that good at photography, and I'll be really found out for that. And I'm sort of charging for work that I don't know how to do, and all these different types of things. And I think these are things that people do genuinely experience and are impacted by. And that's why I really want to talk about it today, because I'm sure there are a lot of people out there experiencing these types of things and just thinking that it either isn't normal, or thinking that it is something that they need to really work hard to get over, or it's something that you need to be more experienced when you probably don't need to be. For me, for the longest period, in that first year of sort of being a photographer, it was hard to really put myself out there and say that I'm a photographer. And I thought that, it'll be easier in time because I will be more of a photographer. But if you think about it, what actually makes you more of a photographer? If I'm out there still taking photos, if I'm out there producing work, then I'm just as much as a photographer as the other person. I may not be as experienced, I may not be as great of a photographer, but the end idea that I am a photographer is the exact same. If I'm charging for my work and there is someone out there who wants to pay me for that work, then that's okay. And that's how much I'm worth. And we've spoken about that on the podcast before, that I don't need to be charging for how much experience I have or how much I think I'm worth, because if someone else is happy to pay me for that work, then I must be worth that. And I need to sort of get over the fact that I don't think I'm at a certain standard, so therefore I'm not a photographer. And that is something that did hold me back. So I want to be able to give you guys that and say that you don't have to hang on for a year. You don't have to wait for 5 years down the track to all of a sudden realize you're a photographer, and then you just hit a switch and all of a sudden you are a photographer. It is a transition, but no one is saying that if you're not over a certain mark, you can't advertise yourself. You can't be able to put yourself out there as this type of anything, as an expert in any type of field. So it is something that does impact a lot of people, and that is just how it impacted me. So I want to start with reading out the definition of imposter syndrome from my good old friend Wikipedia. And here it says that imposter syndrome is a psychological pattern in which an individual doubts their skills, talents, or accomplishments and has a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. I think that just sums up everything that I was just talking about in my own photography, and thinking that I can't possibly go out as a photographer and charge for work in case someone finds out that I'm not a real photographer, in case someone finds out that I don't have as much experience as I portray that I do, as I act like I do because I work in this profession, as I produce work I'm producing the same quality of work of someone who's been in the industry for over 10 years. So therefore I'm a fraud because I really haven't been here for 10 years. So I can't be charging the same amount of money for the exact same amount of work, So it really comes down to that. And a lot of people do struggle with this, because I think that it is something that hits a lot of people hard. So I really want to talk about some of these things today, and talk about how it can really manifest, but also how we can overcome it, because it's something that I've had to come at a lot in heaps of different types of areas, and it's something that I've kind of grown and started to get more used to. But I think as I expand, it'll hit me again and it'll hit me again. So it's not something that we ever inertly overcome in our own life, but every time I do hit it, it becomes easier to get over every single time. Now, in this episode, I'm not going to dig into any of the sort of personality traits or the psychology around the individual type of person who is more likely to experience imposter syndrome, but I will say that it's very closely related to something we spoke about a few weeks ago, which is perfectionism. And people that experience perfectionism are more likely to experience imposter syndrome. And I don't think that's a surprise to anyone, because someone who experiences perfectionism wants their work to be perfect. And if it's not out there in the world. Someone experiences imposter syndrome is too scared to put work out there in the world because they don't think they're in a position to be able to put it out there. They don't think they're an expert enough to be able to put that work out there. So it's very, very sort of closely related, and you can see how both of those are able to hold people back, and it's no surprise that a lot of people are being held back by this. So I really want to talk about why it is people don't tend to talk about or tend to do things that they don't know a lot about. Like, for instance, for me, I sit down here every week and think about the things that I can talk about on this podcast, and every time an idea comes up for me that is something that I haven't experimented in or is something that I don't know a lot about, I tend to second guess whether I can speak about that on this podcast. Even if I think the information could be useful for you guys, even if I do the research on it and sort of present it, if I haven't either used it in my own life or had experience about it before, I don't think that I'm overly qualified to speak about it here, which is, I think, sort of goes the wrong way about it, because most of the time, if you can provide someone with a bit of information, a bit of value, you can sort of give someone a starting point. And if I'm able to give you anything today, it's hopefully a starting point into being able to do your own research and be able to explore your own things in your own life. So I'm not trying to give you answers here to any particular one thing. All I'm trying to do is educate you and hand you a starting point to head in the right direction. So we really should be encouraging people to talk about a whole wide variety of things, even if they don't know a lot about it, because first off, I can learn a lot from something by speaking about it, even if I don't know a lot about it, and I can open myself up to that. I can open myself up to be actually wrong about some things, because then I can learn about them a lot more. But also other people can be educated about them. If I'm talking about something I don't know a lot about, probably the type of people who are listening to this wouldn't know a lot about it either, and therefore I can educate people on an area which they may not know a lot about. Whereas when people stick to the things that they know, they're only going to be talking to the types of people who are interested in their work, who probably already know about all that stuff as well. So we should really be trying to skew it to, it's okay to talk about those things. I'm not trying to profess that I'm an expert in any particular area. And if I started talking about something on here which I'm not an expert in, I'll be really honest about that with you guys. And I'll say that I'm okay if you explore this on your own, because I don't have all the answers, and I don't have all the answers on anything. But anything in particular that I really want to talk about, I have to sort of go through that process of thinking, have I had the experience on it, and am I able to speak about it in a way that I don't think I'll ever be attacked based on what it is I'm saying because I'm wrong. And you have to let go of that fear of being wrong first off, but also you have to open yourself up to be able to speak about things that you may not know a lot about. Now, don't get me wrong, sometimes feeling like a fraud is a good thing. When you're trying to talk about something you know absolutely nothing about, if you're trying to actively lie about something, then that idea of feeling like a fraud is probably a good thing, that it holds you back and stops you from trying to do those particular things. But in most cases, feeling like you don't know everything about things is okay. And I don't think anyone knows everything about everything, but it's just those people who are at the top and who are able to get over that are always the ones that are going to learn more, always the ones that are going to grow more, because they've been open to that sort of criticism early on. They've been open to the fact that they don't know everything, and they're still going to provide as much as they know. If it turns out the information they provided was wrong, that's okay, because they've learned from that and they've already moved on from it before the person who is interrogating their work has actually moved on from the fact that they've actually learned something from it, and they're glad that they actually picked up on the fact that it was wrong, and they've moved on from that. One of the biggest things that helps me is to realize that I don't have to be the smartest person in the room. I don't have to be the smartest person on the planet in order to be able to speak about something, because if I had to be, there would only ever be one person speaking about one particular thing, and unless you were that top person, you could never educate anyone else. I just have to know that I know a little bit about it, and I probably know more than who I'm trying to talk to. And if I can convince myself of that, if I convince myself that I know more about a particular area than someone else, then I'm in a position where I can educate on that, because there is someone who doesn't know as much as me. I may be talking to a lot of people here who know heaps more than me, and that's okay. But as long as I think that there's one person out there who I can help and one person that I know more than, then I'm in a great position, because I can then speak about something, or I can then do something more than the other person knows. So in my photography, for example, I know that I'm more educated as a photographer than the person I'm probably taking photos of. And that helps me a lot. I know that they don't know a lot about photography. I know that they don't know what it is that I do a lot. They may have an overall judgment on how I perform on the day, how I present them with the photos at the end, but in the types of styles and the things that I'm trying to do, they don't know a lot about it. So I'm walking in there and I can charge for that service because I know more than them, and I'm offering that service to them because they are in a position where they are only after my style of service, right? So I'm not offering it to someone who wants something far above anything that I can produce, because I wouldn't get anyone ask me about work if I haven't produced that type of work before. If I have produced that type of work before, then that's okay, and that's a completely different thing when I have anxiety around producing that type of work again, because I know I can produce it. The other person knows I can produce it. It's just that actually having anxiety around producing that quality work again is hard, and having expectations is hard. But that's not imposter syndrome. That's just feeling like you aren't able to live up to those expectations ever again. But I feel like imposter syndrome would hit though when I'm promising on something I know I can't deliver. And that can often come in any form. If you're trying to say that you can do something which you haven't done before, that can be certainly a position where you would feel imposter syndrome, and I would really hate to ever be in that position. So that turns me away from being in that decision. And so knowing that I'm able to deliver this work because I have produced it before is a great way to overcome that imposter syndrome, because I know it is something that I've done before, and I know that I probably know more about it than the other person. So I'm in a really good standing to be able to try to deliver on that type of work. I heard once that if you have read the top 3 books on any particular topic, that you will then know more than 99% of the population about that particular topic. So you're in a great standing to be able to educate on that particular topic if you understand a little bit about it. So just because you don't know more than the most educated person on it, just because you don't know more than the person that spent their whole life working in that field, doesn't mean there's not an audience for you, and doesn't mean that there are people out there who don't know as much as you. So understanding that, and understanding that it's okay to not know everything, because no one ever expects you to know everything. As long as you know more than the other person, you can educate them, and you don't need to feel like an imposter to them, because as long as you're not walking around saying that you're the most educated person on the planet, then you're okay, because you're not being a fraud on this particular issue. I just want to run through a couple of the other things that I think could really help you guys now. And I'm going to run through a list of things that have really helped me, but also a list of things that I think will be able to help you guys as well. And some of the things that I think you can implement in order to overcome imposter syndrome and remember where you're trying to be on the other side. And so the first thing is to know that everyone does go through this. And I think that's one of the biggest things, and one of the biggest reasons why I'm making this episode, not only for you guys, but for myself as well, in knowing that everyone goes through this. And the best way to be able to understand that is to actually speak about it. Actually talk about it with yourself, with your friends, with other people in your community, and understand that you go through it, but other people probably go through it as well. And so understanding you're not alone in this, and this isn't something that you yourself only go through, because if you think that it's only something you are impacted by, then it's easy to feel like you're the fraud because you're the only one that feels this and everyone else is okay. Well, I'm obviously wrong then, and maybe I am being a bit of an imposter here. So it's easy to sort of turn away from it. Whereas when you realize that everyone goes through this, I think it becomes a lot more easier to sort of manage it and move past it on the other side. The other thing I think is to stop comparing yourself to other people, and that's easier said than done, but stop comparing the ideas in your own head to the actions of other people, because that's not an equal comparison in any standard. You comparing what's going on in your head is only something that you know, and it's only something you're aware of, whereas the actions of other people generally aren't portraying what is actually happening in their own head. So they may feel like the biggest imposter in their own head, but just because they're acting like they're not, does not mean that they're not feeling that inside. So don't compare what you're feeling to the actions of other people. Remember that they're probably feeling it inside as well, and stop comparing what you're feeling to their actions. And then the next thing is to overemphasize the positive point about this, is that you actually really care about this. If you didn't, you wouldn't be trying to make this content. You wouldn't be trying to put yourself out there. You wouldn't feel like an imposter if you didn't care. So emphasize that point. Emphasize the fact that because you care, that's why you're feeling this. That's why you're in this position, that you feel like an imposter, because you really do care about what it is you're trying to produce. If you didn't, then you would just move away from it, and you wouldn't really care about the reasons behind why you're feeling that way. And you wouldn't feel like an imposter because you've never actually tried anything before to feel like an imposter. So this must be something you really care about, and really take that positive away from it and use that to drive you forward. So if this is something you really care about, you need to be able to overcome this, and you need to work harder to work out why it is you feel that way, but then also the things you can do to overcome that feeling. And the other thing that I like to do, which goes back on one of the things I was speaking about before, is understanding how much you do know about a particular area. So maybe write down some of the things that you've done before. Write down the achievements, write down the accomplishments that you've had in this particular area, because that all strengthens what it is you think about yourself, and it strengthens your position that you take when you speak about a particular issue, or when you're trying to enter a particular job or enter an industry. If you're constantly feeling like you're below someone else, maybe have a think about the things you've done before. And after you put those things down on paper, you might think, oh, I've actually achieved a lot in this particular area. Maybe I'm not so much of a fraud anymore. Maybe I am okay to speak about this. And maybe I have educated myself enough in this area. Maybe I have spent enough time. Maybe I have done the work here before. So why am I feeling like I'm below someone else? It's easy to forget the things you've done when you aren't having those in your direct memory when you can only think about other people and you can think about what they've done, but you can't think about what you've done. So maybe write some of those down and write down some of your achievements, some of your accomplishments. Give yourself that pat on the back and remember that it's okay because you've really achieved a lot and you really do know what you're talking about and you can educate a lot of other people. Even if you can't educate the people above you, you can do a lot to educate the people below you and you can do a lot to be able to give back to that community. And if you get to the end of that and you think that you really haven't achieved a lot, well, just continue on educating yourself, continue to keep learning and continue to grow in that area because that is one of the biggest ways that you're going to improve in the long term. And you can then educate even more people if you continue to learn, even if you are already at that mark. If you improve yourself even more, if you start to educate yourself a lot more and be open to be able to put things out there in the world and like learn from your mistakes, then you're going to grow a lot more and you're going to be opening yourself up to be more comfortable with who you are, but then you're going to be opening yourself up to talk to more people and educate more people and speak to more people and not feel like that imposter every single time because now you've achieved more and more. So don't constantly be like looking up, constantly be looking at the things that you could be trying to do to be able to get yourself to that next mark rather than thinking that you're below someone else. Think about how it is you can get above that person. I think one of the biggest things for me personally is to remember that experts, sometimes they do get things wrong. Just because they're an expert in a particular area doesn't mean they don't ever get things wrong, doesn't mean they don't ever have failures. So if I fail about something, if I get something wrong, if I speak about something and it's completely the wrong way around and I have to come back here in 3 weeks and say, oh, I was completely wrong on that, or if I walk out and I go take photos and it all goes wrong and I have to turn around to them and say I wasn't able to produce all this work because all this happened, well, that's not the end of the world. Everyone has those mistakes. Everyone has those failures. Even if you are an expert in that particular field, you can still make mistakes. You can still get things wrong. You know, you still have things go wrong regardless. So just because you're trying to put yourself out there in this area doesn't mean you're going to have more go wrong with you than anyone else. And if you've actually done the work, if you know what it is you're talking about, if you have confidence in your own self, then it doesn't matter how much anyone else knows because you can still make a mistake just as much as anyone else is able to make a mistake in any part of their life as well. And then the last thing is to actually visualize where it is you want to be. One of the biggest things that drives me to continue on, and it's been one of the biggest things that's really helped me try to get up to the next stage and continue moving, is to try and visualize where it is I would like to be. I know that by producing this podcast every week, I'm becoming more confident about talking about the types of things that I do talk about on here. And so I know that by continuing to produce these episodes, I can eventually get to a point where I may know more than other people, where I may be able to talk on a particular issue that I may be an expert in. I may be able to continue this as a career and something that I really enjoy as a career and something that I really enjoy in any aspect of life. So if you're trying to pursue something as a career, continue on and think about what that could look like if you continue down the track and remember what it is you're striving for, because I think people can lose sight of that and think, but, oh, it's all too hard. I'm going to go back and try to learn more, when they don't actually value the skills they've already got and use those to be able to grow more and really think about where it is they could be. Because if you're thinking about this imposter syndrome, chances are you're already ahead of the game. You're probably already somewhere where you're thinking about these types of things, where you're thinking you're ahead of other people. There isn't everyone who's in that situation. So if you're already at that stage, maybe if you just continue on, you could be able to progress more than the other person who is being held back by these types of things. So think about where it is you want to go and think about how much you can continue to push, and be open to having those failures. Be open to actually learning from those things, because that's going to propel you forward even more into the future. And so if you can continue to be striving for that point and not really looking at the here and now, because you will make mistakes. You'll make mistakes along your whole journey and you'll feel like you're a fraud the whole way through. But at the end, you've got to be aspiring to that end goal. And once you get there, you'll know that you've actually made something of yourself, and you'll be really glad that you took the steps you did earlier on in your career. And so I think that is where I'm going to leave today's episode, guys. I've been speaking for a bit of time, but I hope this was able to be informational for you guys. I hope you could take something away from this. As I said, I don't know everything about this area, but I hope you could take a little bit away from this and use some of the things that I've had to use before, and some of the things that I've used to really try and overcome this in my own life, trying to overcome it in my own business, overcome it on this podcast, overcome it in a whole bunch of things, whether it's just me speaking to a friend about something that I don't know a lot about. I don't think I should be speaking about it, but I think it can actually help them. And I think that by me talking about it, it might open up an avenue for them to go and do their own research, and it may open up an area of them having a conversation with another person about a particular issue. And if it is, well, that's great. And I'm really glad that I'm able to start that sort of conversation. So I hope I could start a conversation here today with you guys and think about some of the things in your life that you may be held back by imposter syndrome as well. So as I say every week, guys, if you did enjoy this episode, I would really appreciate it if you did share this episode around with a friend. But also, if you are watching this episode on YouTube, I would really appreciate it if you did leave a comment on the video and let me know what you liked about this episode. And if you're really enjoying the podcast, maybe consider subscribing and consider actually leaving some comments on other videos and let me really know, because it's hard on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. You can't really leave anything under particular episodes, so I don't really get to hear much sort of feedback from you guys. But if you would like to message me on Instagram, I'm always open to hearing those messages, and I always enjoy hearing messages from anyone who listens to the podcast. And on that note, remember that you can actually rate the podcast if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, only on Apple Podcasts. So if you're listening on Apple, do consider leaving a review. I would really appreciate it. And I have actually read all the reviews that I've had on the podcast, and you can leave up to a 5-star review there. So that would be really nice if you guys could leave a review and really let me know what it is you're thinking about the podcast. Because I say this every week, that I really sit here behind the microphone and really have all these ideas, but I don't know how they're portraying on the other side. So I'd really love some sort of feedback on these episodes, and I really appreciate anyone who would take the time to actually leave me some sort of feedback and leave me some sort of messages about the podcast, because they are really heard and I do really use them in order to be able to shape what it is that I'm really trying to work on here. But with that said, guys, I hope you have a great week. I hope you really learned something from this episode, and I will speak to you all again next Monday. Bye.